Why am I, a layman, coming to this a century and a half after Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, scratching my head and saying, fellows, this first question, where does life come from in the first place, that's a pretty big one. How is it that a sort of interested layman can only suddenly realize, you guys had this elaborate, what about this? Did science simply treat it as unimportant or so easy that they'd get to it sooner or later? The question of the origin of life.
Nobody knows the origin of life. Nobody has ever known the origin of life, but people assume, very much like the Babylonians assumed, that it came out of a stinking pond. That's where they say their life came out of, and their gods came out of that same pond. And that's the primordial soup model, and that model persists today. You look in any textbook, from elementary school to advanced college textbooks, and it will speak of the primordial soup model. Life came out of that there were molecules that came together and they formed higher order structures, and that formed a cell, and that led to life. That is a bunch of nonsense.
Okay, hold on. I remember those textbooks with flasks and tubes. So let's take a moment there. First of all, you said something interesting. Darwin's warm little pond. Darwin is working in a great tradition here. The Babylonians had myths involving the primordial soup. So let's take a moment here. The famous Miller-Urey experiments of the 1950s, very simple, 2 flasks, closed system with tubes. One flask has ammonia, methane, and a few other elements to simulate the primordial atmosphere. Another flask has water to simulate the primordial ocean. And then electricity gets introduced to simulate lightning. And what do you know? Amino acids seem to settle out of this. And in early experiments, according to my reading, there were 5 amino acids, which could be described as central building blocks of life, I'm told. In later experiments, they refined it, improved it a bit, and they got up to 22 amino acids. And there it seems to have stopped. The science says, oh, that's close enough. We can extrapolate from what's going on there. Keep this up for 1 billion years and you'll end up with life. And James Tour says?
It's garbage. That doesn't work. Yes, they made a number of amino acids. They also made amino acids that are totally unnatural. And so they had many amino acids. I think that there may have been a dozen or so of the amino acids, but it doesn't matter. All of them were achiral, which means they didn't have the handedness that one wants. Organic molecules, aside from the very simplest of organic molecules, have two-handedness. You either have a right-handed model or a left-handed model. Your right and your left hand are mirror images of one another. If you put your right hand up to a mirror, it will appear as your left hand. The two are non-superimposable. That's why your right hand can't fit in a left-handed glove. Molecules are like that. Organic molecules are like that as well. He made both of the images. You have to have one and not the other. So there were other experiments that talked about resolving these, separating these. But that's the easy part. That's actually quite easy. But what was presumed from that experiment, which was actually a very nice experiment, I'm not belittling that experiment at all, is that we would very soon figure out the way to life. That's what was assumed. And so that was 75 years ago. So think about that. Think of what has been done in the last 75 years, where you have this whole silicon era, which started in 1960. You have computers, you have space flight, you have landing on the moon, which was in the 1960s, a long time ago. You have all of this internet connectivity, the medical advances. We still don't know how these things come together. You have to take the amino acids and polymerize them, hook them together. That's a big problem. Nobody has solved that.